bank, when prosperous, comes to be regarded by the people generally as an institution, and the personal character behind it seldom comes to light. Nonetheless, the strength of the institution depends on the directors and officers who control its affairs, and the confidence of the people in the bank is only another way of stating the reliability of the people responsible for its financial management. The Coldwater Reporter, 1907.
In the early part of the 19th century, only the strongest of courage and heart dared to leave the relative safety and comfort of the East. But land was plentiful on the frontier, and anyone with the will to survive and the strength to work hard could carve a life out of the forests and prairies in the West.
My father built a board shanty in which to house our family until a more substantial house of logs would be ready on the spot cleared for it. It was in the woods nearly a mile from any neighbor. Game of all sorts were plenty in the forests about the clearing, and my father one day shot a large deer from the doorway of our house. Moretta Chase, Pioneer.
The Sauk Trail through the Great Lakes region was known to be relatively safe. Although populated by Potawatomi Indians, it could provide a good home and future for anyone who chose to make the journey. The year 1831 saw the first cabin made of logs erected about 250 feet north of what is now the corner of Chicago and Monroe Streets, downtown Coldwater. It was built by Joseph Hanchett and was lived in by a succession of families, including the Hanchett's, the Lorenzo Crippens, and a preacher named Allen Tibbetts. Together with Hanchett, Tibbetts laid out the village and named it Lyons, following the practice of naming new towns after existing cities. However, after only a year, the name was changed to Coldwater from the little river nearby, which the Indians had named Chucksenyabish. The little village was off to a vigorous start, and in 1840, Coldwater was named the branch county seat. Diverse businesses began to spring up like wildfire, and with new business came prosperity. Grand homes began to appear, reflecting new fortunes being made.
The 1850 railroad arrival helped quite a bit. We gained population steadily, I would say, up until about the turn of the century when it started to decline.
The 1840s and 50s were successful years in Coldwater, and the population increased to 3,977 by 1858. Dry goods, bakeries, carriage building, and the horse trade. Horses were a valuable commodity, and Coldwater became one of the preeminent suppliers of horse flesh in the country. A.C. Fisk became the largest horse breeder in the area and built a fine home east of town from the profits.
A.C. Fisk had a farm east of town and bred some high-grade horses and was famous in the country for his horses, which led in the 1860s to the Civil War. Branch County supplied the North with a lot of the horses.
When the railroad came through, with its influx of new people, it also brought the need for hotels, providing residents with even more opportunities for commerce. And with more commerce, financial institutions would be needed. Small banks like the Crippen and Fisk Banking Office and Dennis and Star Exchange would help to provide financial service to the local people. But in 1861, Civil War.
I told you to get going!
The abolition of slavery was the main issue in the North, and since Coldwater had long been actively involved with the Underground Railroad, her role would be aggressive. The town would supply hundreds of men to the Union war effort during the Civil War. And many families would say goodbye to their men, not knowing if they would ever see them again. Most of the area soldiers would be in what would come to be known as the Loomis Battery, which was engaged in many famous and hard-fought battles during the war, and would exist until the guns were captured near the end of the conflict. Revered as heroes, these men would live out their lives in Branch County, proud of their service. With the end of the Great War, the rebuilding of the nation began, and Coldwater would certainly rise to the occasion. The main street, now known as the Chicago Pike, would now begin to see new buildings built by the day. This activity was not lost on a local lawyer named Caleb Randall. Destined to become mayor, state senator, and the primary motivator for the state-run school to locate in Coldwater, this active, well-thought-of individual would be an important figure in Southern Michigan National Bank's beginnings. Cyrus Luce was noticing, too. He was the 1860s county treasurer and would eventually become governor of Michigan. A local businessman, attorney, future state representative, and participant in the 1849 California Gold Rush named Julius Barber would also see opportunities ahead. Others including Edwin Clark, an honest, forthright, and respected local businessman. Lester Rose, who would eventually become president of the bank. Businessman Luther Hale, future mayor Dr. David Powers, and businessman Henry Safford would all see what was needed. These men, in 1871, would meet in C.D. Randall's law office, 19 Chicago Street, to organize what would become Southern Michigan National Bank. Flushed with anticipation and eager to get started, the new venture was incorporated, written by hand in this very ledger, and opened for business in the early months of 1872 in S.M. Seeley's bank rooms, located in the Southern Michigan Hotel building next to the public square. Stockholders included many of the town's prominent citizens, and the enterprise promised to be an immediate success through hard work and consistent trade practices. This ethic would serve the bank well through the coming years. Of course, any respectable, successful bank certainly needed to have its own building, and Southern Michigan National Bank would be no exception. The corner lot of Monroe and Chicago Streets was, at that time, the location of the first brick building built in the city. The old brick structure would make way for the city of Coldwater's new banking empire.
All the contractors have executed their work in the best workmanlike manner and have made this the finest and most substantial structure in the city. The Coldwater Reporter.
It went up, what, 6 steps, maybe, anyway, to a tile floor like a YMCA, something like that. The teller's cages, I think, were very typical. They were probably walnut and oak with brass and so forth, and we would think it as forbidding, okay, but that was the banking atmosphere in those days.
The business moved in July of 1872. One of the first bank books issued was to an acquaintance of Lester Rose's named D.W. Fairbanks. Mr. Fairbanks used the bank book often, as did an ever-increasing segment of the town of Coldwater. Things were booming, as evidenced by the appearance of fantastic exhibitions, such as the Lewis Art Gallery. Owned by Henry Lewis, it housed one of the most complete art collections in the world. Summer resorts were also being built on area lakes, bringing tourism and their tourist dollars with them. Huge homes were being constructed, and all needed capital to operate. By the end of Southern Michigan National Bank's first year, assets reached $253,000 and were growing. Deposits were $130,000, which included $81,000 in circulating notes. Circulated by individual banks, these notes were $5, $10, and $20 bills that were backed by United States government bonds. The bank moved ahead throughout the first 20 years with C.D. Randall at the helm. Mr. Randall stepped down from the presidency in 1893 and Lester Rose took over. This was the only change in the presidency since the bank had opened. Accounts were consistently growing. Notice that inspections were done personally by the bank officers on a rotation basis. Everywhere you looked was success.
Luckily, we had Barton Smith Tibbetts, who spent $25,000 in 1883 for a beautiful, beautiful French Empire building. There was a need for an opera house in every town because of lack of television and radio. This was the entertainment. This was the arts that everyone remembered from Europe and New England, was you've got to have the arts.
Advertising has always been important, as evidenced by the Southern Michigan National Bank's standard ad in the Coldwater Republican every day in the top left-hand corner. Business continued smoothly as America was experiencing the positive effects of an industrialized society. Coldwater had its share, and they all needed money to grow. Bank President Lester Rose did his best to make sure that they had it.
A bank should always go forward and never rest upon previous accomplishments. Lester Rose.
World War I, as in the Civil and the Spanish-American Wars, saw its share of local boys go into the service. It was scary, but the town made sure they all got a big welcome when they came home. In 1926, Lester Rose retired from the presidency, and Leroy Palmer would step in. Rose was the last of the original board to serve as an officer.
A very fine gentleman. And I think that you probably could say he represented one of the important, very important families of Coldwater.
In 1929, the banking world would forever be changed by the most severe stock market crash before or since.
What I was aware of was that the family finances were different. I wouldn't have known why. I was 8 years old and like that. But I do remember the day my father came back from the bank and was very pleased because they agreed if he could pay the interest, they would forego any payment on the principal. Now, the banks were tickled to death to do that because they had property, they had a lot of property, but it was worthless to them. They couldn't make it work. So if somebody would pay the interest, they were very happy to carry it along, and I remember that.
But not every bank had problems.
Roosevelt called a banking holiday. This bank never closed up. The old boys that were running it knew they had money right in the till to pay off anybody that wanted to walk in the door. Of course, nobody walked in the door. All it did was bring in money.
1935 brought more tragedy when Leroy Palmer was killed in a car crash. Mr. Palmer was replaced by Norman Cole.
He originally came from the First National Bank at Quincy. And I was not on the board when he came here, but he was in the old building, of course. And a man by the name of Howard Lees was the treasurer of the bank.
All of the people worked out of a common cash drawer, and that's unheard of today because there's just no security in that at all. And they used to have a devilish time balancing that every night.
The 1940s, unfortunately, brought more trouble for the country. But as usual, Coldwater was able to stay on an even keel. The bank was fine and run with a stern hand by Mr. Cole.
Coldwater came through the Depression. There were no, I'm positive of this, there were no governmental bonds, either municipal or county or school or anything else that were ever defaulted on. I think the area came through probably what you would say was pretty clean.
Of course, the rationing was really tough. For example, the thing that bothered me the most was gasoline. And there was no way I could get gasoline. I used to have some friends at Tecumseh, and I thought I was going to get a lot of business down there. But you simply couldn't get gasoline.
By the time Howard Snyder became president in 1951, things were cooking. The bank had done well, considering the tumult of the last 2 decades, and everyone on the board wanted to see it grow, and in particular, modernize. A new building was the answer, and a new era had begun.
I think there were 26 properties that had to be cleared where the bank is now. For example, directly to the south of the building was the Coldwater cleaners. Next to the Coldwater cleaners was the residence of the people that owned the Coldwater cleaners. We had to take the house out, the business out, and of course provide enough funds to build a new one.
Promotions were the practice of the day, and Southern Michigan National Bank would be no exception. The bank went all out with newspaper advertising, handouts, and gimmicks.
Of course, you mentioned the hop-along passenger account. That was way before my time, but that was a big thing, as you found out. I'm not sure, but if I remember correctly, William Boyd did show up at one time to show support for that kind of account. And we had hoppy accounts for a year. We finally closed out the last one probably maybe 10 years ago, but we had those things for years.
It's important to have fun and keep a visible presence in the public eye, but it is also important to continually progress in business. It's the only way to survive.
They had a system where cars would leapfrog one another, and they had drive-in windows built into the side of the building. Well, I can only imagine that was a lot of fun. I guess they had many fender benders, people trying to go around somebody, and they were trying to pull out, and it was kind of a disaster. So this was such a great improvement. It was terrific. But they did have drive-in service here from 1955.
Southern Michigan National Bank has always valued its customers, but realizing that it all starts with personal relationships has been a guiding factor in the way the bank does business.
Rates are one thing, and rates on a car are another, so people can flow back and forth very quickly. But what we need to do and what we have to do to succeed is to give the best service we can.
People. We've been fortunate.
He was my mentor and friend for a year.
He certainly was a legend in this community.
A high-class man.
Oh, I love that man. He was a mentor for me.
Oh, Lester was a doll.
To say that Lester Wise was a popular man would certainly be an understatement. Lester had started out at the bank in the 30s as a teller, and only World War II would take him away for a few years.
He and a good friend of his followed me around in my car when I came over one Sunday afternoon, and they stopped, and I had 2 girls with me, and they didn't pay attention to them. And
it was time to grow, and by 1963, when he was made president, Lester Wise was ready. The Union City Bank would be purchased with cash and would increase assets by $3,900,000.
And then they had Mr. Wise do the dealing with us beginning in about 67. And in 69, we got together in about 20 minutes and made a nice deal. It was very good for each one of us.
In 1972, a grand celebration would dominate the year. 100 years of banking.
he asked me over to the church one Sunday if I would frost and decorate a wooden cake for him. And I said, sure. And so Leg Lumber made the cake for him, and they brought it over here and set it up in the front big bay window, and Les said that's my spot to work in. So I made a lot of frosting and came down and had to have several coats to cover the raw wood, but we got it done.
We would also see a new arrival from Chicago.
Lester Wise brought me here, my predecessor. I, at the time, was working for a bank in Chicago.
In 1974, the Union City Drive-In was opened. In 1977, the Kinderhook and East Chicago branches were also opened. The 70s were aggressive, and Lester Wise was always in the middle of the fray.
Lester was kind of funny, that he was a service-minded person. I mean, you know, if he walked out in the lobby and there was one or two customers, he wanted to know immediately why they didn't get waited on.
He was just always taking care of somebody.
By 1979, Wise had become chairman, and the new kid was president.
He stepped up from president to chairman of the board in '79, and I became president in '79, but he was still the chief executive officer and stayed that way until the end of '83.
Jerry was instrumental in forming the holding company, Southern Michigan Bancorp, and was active in pushing the company to greater heights and successes. But he was destined to quickly become chairman of the board, which moved James Grohowski into the president's chair. In 1987, Southern Michigan National Bank purchased Michigan National Bank South with deposits of $11 million. This included offices in Hillsdale and Camden. In 1990, the decision was made to purchase the old Ethan Allen building in Battle Creek, and Southern Michigan National Bank, after 118 years, would see growth in 3 counties, including Athens in 1994. This would be followed by the 1996 edition of the new Loan Center in Coldwater, coincidentally on the site of the Southern Michigan Hotel, and the purchase of the Northeast branch in Battle Creek, the opening of the Battle Creek Mortgage Center, and North Adams. In 1992, Southern Michigan National Bank would change from a nationally chartered bank to a state-chartered bank, allowing much more freedom to grow. A new name would be created, Southern Michigan Bank and Trust.
Make sure that that customer is aware that you want him, and that's our philosophy. Whether it's John Jones, Jane Jones, or whoever, you want to make sure that that customer feels that they're wanted.
I feel terrifically satisfied that I'll be leaving shortly. Things are in great hands, and I have no worries about it.
People. We've been fortunate.
Southern Michigan Bank and Trust, an evolution of 125 years. As the community and the world has changed, so has Southern Michigan Bank and Trust, but change with a purpose, and that has always been to ensure viability through sensible, well-thought-out growth, business practices, investment, and, most importantly, concern for the communities we live and work in. Southern Michigan Bank and Trust. 125 years of caring, and it has always been banking as it should be.